Going to get started this morning. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so that you can all see me and I can introduce myself along with my co-presenter, Marissa Lang. So my name is Kendra Glett, and I am the Director of National Programs at Proof Alliance. We are a nonprofit focused on fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. And so we're very happy that you're sharing your morning with us this morning to learn a lot about FASD and what you can do in your own practices to respond to FASD. So I'm going to co-present with Marissa. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, good morning. My name is Marissa Lang, Senior Program Manager at Proof Alliance. And my work includes our family and youth work, which also includes developing and implementing our youth programming for about the last 10 years. So I'm happy to share some strategies this morning.
All right. So while we're together this morning, we are going to have a PowerPoint to go through some slides. We will break up the slides kind of in the middle of the presentation and show a video, and then continue with some more slides. But we know that we want to make sure we have time for your questions as well. So I find it tricky if you're raising your hand or something while I'm sharing my screen or while Marissa is. We can't always see it. So we're just going to have some moments where we pause during our presentation and check for any questions so that we make sure we get to your questions. So with that, I am going to get started here. All right. So I said a little bit about who we are. Proof Alliance, we are a nonprofit based in Minnesota, and we have a dual purpose mission. So we work on both preventing fetal alcohol spectrum disorders and also supporting all of those impacted, whether that be the individual themselves or their family unit or their circle of support around them. So we really look at both prevention and support throughout our organization. And before we dive into the presentation, I do want to make a note that we acknowledge that not every person who can become pregnant identifies as a woman. So during the presentation, there are times when we use mother or woman because that is what has been used in the research that we are referring to. However, we try to use gender neutral language as often as possible. So to get started here, what we will go through during our time together is we'll start off with taking a little time to talk about what FASD is and how prenatal alcohol exposure impacts that developing brain. We'll talk about stigma and how to move past stigma and into that place of support. We'll have some time to discuss why someone with an FASD is at more risk for involvement in the criminal justice system. And then we'll also definitely have time for strategies that you can use when working with youth or adults with an FASD. So I'll start out by giving an overview of FASD, and I understand that you all attending today may be coming from different places of your understanding. You may have a lot of knowledge about FASD, or this might be pretty new to you, but if it's not new, we may have some new information because this is a new field and it's changing all the time. So here is the most up-to-date information that we do know about FASD. When I say FASD, what that means is fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Sometimes people are more familiar with fetal alcohol syndrome or FAS, but that is included in the whole spectrum, FASD. That is one diagnosis included in the umbrella term of fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. So what this is a brain-based disorder. It does happen when there is alcohol consumed during pregnancy that impacts that developing brain. It is preventable, as that is the only way that it is caused is by drinking alcohol during pregnancy. But once that impact has been made, those effects are lifelong and irreversible. So this is not something that someone will grow out of. or something that they can take a medication and it goes away. It is something with them throughout their entire life. However, that doesn't mean that individuals with an FASD will not be able to succeed. We know that with the right supports and services in place, individuals with FASD can lead very successful and fulfilling lives. And so a lot of what that involves is learning about FASD and doing exactly what you're doing today, finding out what you can do to help support those that are impacted. So just to explain that spectrum part of FASD a little bit more, it does include all of these different diagnoses. So there is fetal alcohol syndrome, but there are also a number of others. And we won't go into this too much in detail. We just really want you to recognize if you see any of these, if you come across them, that they are included in the FASD spectrum. So you'll see there's also partial fetal alcohol syndrome, ARND, which is alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder, ARBD, which is alcohol-related birth defects, and NDPAE, which is neurobehavioral disorder associated with prenatal alcohol exposure. So again, we don't expect you to know how these are all differentiated. Just know that when we're talking about FASD today, it applies to all of these different diagnoses. I will also mention that fetal alcohol effects is sometimes still seen. That is now an outdated term. It is something they previously used as a diagnosis and is no longer being used, but you might come across it in old research or books or people that were possibly diagnosed way when this first was identified. FAS wasn't really a diagnosis until the mid 1970s, but I just wanted to note that as well in case you see FAE. So when we talk about FASD, we can think about that impact that alcohol has and how many people may be impacted by alcohol during pregnancy and consider how common it might be. So the first thing we'll ask you to consider is FASD more common than Down syndrome? So you can just put in the chat T or F if you feel like it is more common or less common than Down syndrome. I'm sorry, you can put true or false. It is more common than Down syndrome. I will let you know that it is in fact more common than Down syndrome. That one is true. The next one is autism. Do you feel that FASD is more common than autism? Can think about that. We hear about autism quite a lot. But it is in fact true. FASD is more common than autism. So if you think about FASD in general, true or false, is it the leading cause of intellectual disabilities in the US? As you may have come to the conclusion from this presentation, that is indeed true. It is the leading cause of intellectual disabilities in our country. So I'm going to go back, when we think about how common it is, our best estimate of the prevalence is actually 1 in 20 individuals in our country has an FASD. That is not how many people are diagnosed with an FASD. Many individuals are undiagnosed. It is not something that has been identified. But as far as the prevalence, 1 in 20 individuals have some degree of FASD somewhere in the spectrum that we're talking about today as a result of prenatal alcohol exposure. So quite common, and sometimes that can be quite surprising to people how prevalent it really is. So there are many of us that know individuals that have an FASD, are seeing individuals very frequently that have an FASD, whether or not they're diagnosed. They may have some of the challenges and complications that we'll talk about today. And so that is why it's so important that you're learning how to support them. So I do want to think about how every pregnancy is different, and the way that alcohol impacts the fetus depends on a number of things. So um, you may have heard really a lot of different messages as far as how much alcohol is okay to drink during pregnancy. The only thing we know for sure is that if there's no alcohol consumed during pregnancy, then there's no chance of having an FASD. The reason we can't say how much is safe is because it depends on all of these factors. So genetics comes into play as far as how the alcohol impacts the developing fetus. The pregnant person's diet, what they're eating, sometimes higher levels of iron or choline can be protective factors. Also, their age, so that will impact their health and ability to perhaps be more resilient to the impacts or not. Also, other substances that are included with the alcohol exposure can change the way that the alcohol exposure impacts the developing fetus. And the amount of alcohol as well. So whether it was a small amount, whether it was binge drinking, those will change how it is impacted. I'll also say the resiliency of the fetus itself is something that we aren't able to detect. So there are actually twin studies where the same twins are exposed to the same amount of alcohol in the same environment, and one has been more impacted than the other and has even received a different diagnosis. So all of these things combined really changes the way that the impact happens, and we aren't able to predict and turn and say for you, you know, 1 drink a week is safe, for you 2 drinks a month is safe. We have no idea how much is going to be considered safe for each individual because we can't put all these factors together. And so that's why the takeaway is the only thing we know for sure is if there's no alcohol consumed, there won't be FASD. I'll also note that last bullet says type of alcohol. That is not something that changes how the fetus is impacted. So it doesn't matter what type of alcohol. Sometimes there's misconceptions of, you know, that wine is safer than other drinks, but alcohol is alcohol, and so it really doesn't matter what it is when there's alcohol exposure. So we also often have the question of how this shows up in different communities, different geographic areas, and we want to just take a moment to explore how FASD is present in all communities, all socioeconomic status, all neighborhoods, all cultures, because alcohol is very prevalent in our community. So it really doesn't matter, you know, where you look up. FASD is prevalent in all of those spaces. However, we do know that because of social determinants of health, some of these things that you see here can impact the either protective factors or the risks that are associated with alcohol during pregnancy. So, for instance, someone that has better access to good nutrition, early and early access to prenatal care and good health care throughout their experience, um, early access to additional support if they need support to not drink during pregnancy, if they're struggling with substance use disorder. All of those things can be in their favor, or on the flip side, all of those things can make it more difficult to have an alcohol-free pregnancy if they're not able to access prenatal care in the same way, if they're experiencing discrimination in the healthcare setting, if they're not able to access treatment in a timely manner and appropriate manner for them, if it's not culturally relevant, if they don't have that good nutrition that can be protective. So you can see how, while FASD is in all communities, some of the social determinants of health can really change how that shows up in different populations. So this is a visual to look at how different parts of the developing fetus is being impacted by that alcohol exposure. And you can see different areas here, but what I really want to focus on is this top line. This is the brain going all the way through the entire pregnancy. And so you can see there's no window of time where that line stops. And we can say during this time during pregnancy, it's safe to drink, you won't be impacting the brain. That brain is developing throughout the entire pregnancy. And so there's always opportunity for it to, as it grows, if there's alcohol exposure, it could be impacted. Now, we know that FASD and drinking during pregnancy is associated with a lot of stigma. And so we want to just take a moment and think about what are some of the reasons why someone would drink during pregnancy. So while sometimes people are making certain assumptions, we know that there are many different reasons why prenatal alcohol exposure could happen. Perhaps they are drinking before they know they are pregnant. There are roughly half of all pregnancies in our country are unplanned. So if you think about how often people are drinking alcohol and not knowing they are pregnant, there is a lot of opportunity there for those two to cross and have a lot of alcohol exposure happening without the person even knowing that they're pregnant yet. Perhaps they don't know about the risks associated with prenatal alcohol exposure, so they have been given misinformation or a lot of mixed messages that are out there, not really helping them understand the impact that alcohol can have. We do know that sometimes there's still healthcare providers that are giving information that is outdated and wrong about the risks of alcohol during pregnancy. We are working hard as an organization to change that, but it's still happening. Perhaps they know someone who drank during pregnancy and their child has not been diagnosed with an FASD, so they look to that as an example that alcohol exposure is not something that they have to worry about. However, as we mentioned earlier, many times FASD isn't diagnosed or recognized, or it could be that the infant doesn't show any characteristics yet at birth or early on to be identified as having an FASD, and it's not present until they are, it's not, sorry, it's present, but it's not able to be detected and identified until they're older. Usually we really are able to see that more in early childhood to early elementary school years. And so we know that that could be the case. Or as I said, it's hard to know if two people drink the same amount of alcohol at the same time during their pregnancy, it's not going to impact that developing baby the same way. And so there's no way to know for sure. Of course, there might be an alcohol use disorder. So we know that simply saying don't drink during pregnancy is not always enough to give the information. They might need that additional support to be able to do that and abstain from alcohol during pregnancy. And if they're not getting that support, that can make it more challenging. They're part of a culture where drinking alcohol is socially acceptable. So even though we know the information, they may be going to places with family and friends. This is similar to the next bullet point where they may be encouraged. I've heard it's fine, just go ahead, a little won't hurt. And so that can make it challenging as well, even if they're trying to or considering not drinking alcohol during pregnancy and getting, not feeling supported in making that decision by their circle of family and friends. So I just want us to think about if there is alcohol exposure during pregnancy, not to jump to conclusions on why that alcohol exposure happened, as we know that it can be, for many of these reasons, it can be very more complex. All right, so we're taking some time in this presentation to just clear up a lot of the misinformation that's out there, and there is this myth that all people with an FASD have specific facial features. So many times there's misinformation that you can just see if someone has an FASD. And while there are some facial features, we know that only roughly 10 to 15% of people with FASD actually have these facial features. So I will mention them um, with the caveat that we can't rely on them when trying to identify if someone has an FASD or not. So if you look at these pictures here, all four of them have the facial features of FASD. So it's small, short palpebral fissures. So that is they measure the eye length here. Also a smooth philtrum, so the smooth area between the nose and upper lip. Instead of a groove there, it's smooth across. And then a very thin upper lip as well. So those are the facial features of FASD. But as I said, not everyone has those. Most people do not. And so most people have this invisible disability. You cannot see it when you're just looking at them. However, their brain has been impacted by the alcohol exposure. And so that can make it even more challenging when people are looking to an individual and expecting them to be able to have, reasoning and judgment and executive functioning. We'll talk more about those things, but in fact, those are some places where they have some challenges, but you can't see it just by looking at them. So here are some of the areas that are impacted. Really, all of these can be impacted by prenatal alcohol exposure, from vision to hearing, balance. But really what we're going to think about a lot is this frontal lobe, because this is most impacted by prenatal alcohol exposure. That is where we have our executive functioning, our ability to use memory, plan, execute our plan, learn from behavior, a lot of that. So if you're familiar with traumatic brain injury, this is a lot of what you'll see also in that, because typically a traumatic brain injury happens at the front of the frontal lobe and impacts that area as well. So just to help you really see how this is a brain-based disorder, here are some images from the University of Minnesota where there's research happening. And you can see this individual on this side does not have an FASD. So this is a control, no FASD here. However, the same age individual over here has an FASD. And without knowing all the names of the parts of the brain, we don't have to get into specifics, but you can just see when we compare these, we'll see here's the corpus callosum. It's much smaller, underdeveloped. The cerebellum here as well. There's even some space where it could have grown into. And so you can see the size of different areas. Even overall, the size is smaller than the individual without an FASD. And then here, you can see how making these connections, they're just firing on all levels here throughout the brain. But here, there are definitely spaces where there's those fibers are not reaching. And, you can just think about if someone has information stored away in their memory and they're not able to pull it out when they need to and remember it at the right time. Maybe they can tomorrow or they can next week, but in the moment, they can't always access that information. I think this visual just kind of helps us remember that, sometimes if we're getting frustrated with these memory lapses and with these changes, that it really is their brain functioning and brain disorder. We also want to think a little bit about how they are getting to getting involved with the criminal justice system more than someone without an FASD. So according to the American Bar Association, the average age people with an FASD begin having trouble with the law is 12.8 years old. So we're going to think about why that is and talk about some of the characteristics of FASD here. So if they have difficulty with impulse control, we can understand that they will see something and not always pause to think, oh, that's against the rule that I learned either at school, at home, or bigger, that's against the law. They just see it and they act on that impulse without checking in on if it might be a good or bad decision. That ability to plan and connect cause and effect really shows up. So they act on something without connecting that to the result. It'll result in getting grounded or getting a detention or getting arrested. Linking a behavior with the outcome is not something that they are always able to do without support. So we can also see how that would lead them into getting in trouble. Also, sometimes having a hard time with regulating their emotions. So that can lead to explosive episodes that may result in some more, uh, again, getting in trouble with the law if they are experiencing this instead of being able to regulate and calm and follow orders and what's expected of them. Poor social skills and lack of boundaries. So not identifying dangerous people, just trying to make friends, trying to get along with everyone, so we can see how they can be taken advantage of um, by other peers that see this and notice this, and ask them to do the dirty work, and they're the ones that end up getting in trouble. We also see confabulation. So this looks a lot like lying, but actually what confabulation is because of those memory deficits, they're being asked a question, and confabulation is responding with the wrong information, not purposefully, so not trying to lie, but just because they remember it differently. So to really simplify this, if you're asking, me what color that house was that I passed, and I say it was a gray house, my friend says it was a brown house. I just remember it differently. I'm not purposefully trying to lie, but that's how I remember it in my head. So just purely saying how they remember it differently without being intentional, but many times it's interpreted as purposefully lying. And then easily influenced by others. So, like I said, being taken advantage of by others to be enticed into what their plan is, and then being the one to commit the crime. So, we're going to do a little activity here to help think about comprehension and why the comprehension might be hard. So this might look strange to you if you're looking at the slide here, but I'm going to read you a little story here and then ask you some questions, and we'll have a moment to really see how well you could comprehend the story. So here we go. Last Fernin, Diddy Goopin and Greppy were in the Pacu, slatching boongles and treppering cleaning burleys. Suddenly, an oinkly boozle kapanked into Diddy Goopin's wharf. Greppy chifed and chifed. Oh, Diddy Goopin, he panked, that oinkerly boozle is winning in your burley. All right, so now that we've heard that story, who are the characters? We can look at it. You can chime in or put in the chat. But if we look at the story, we can answer that the characters are Diddy, Goopin, and Greppy. What were they doing? They were slatching boongles and treppering cleaning burleys. Then what happened to Diddy Goopin's wharf? Well, you can see in the story an oinkerly boozle kapanked into Diddy Goopin's wharf. So then what happened next? What did Greppy do? He chifed and chifed. So this is an example of how we can look at the story, but do you actually understand what happened here? What just happened? Can you act it out? Can you draw it? You might not have a clue what happened during the story, but if you're looking for what to give me as the correct answer, you can find it. You know what the answer is, but you have no comprehension of what exactly happened. So this is just one example of how someone with an FASD can maybe navigate the world and tell you the answers that they know you're expecting. They know what the right answers are and what they're supposed to say. But if you actually ask them further questions and do, kind of take that next step to look at how they really are comprehending things, that's when you can identify a need to really help explain, and that the comprehension may not be there when it is assumed many times that it is because they're giving the right answers. So just keep this in mind. Sometimes when we hear the answer we're expecting, or even just a, yep, I understand it, I got it, then we will understand that they actually, if we're checking for understanding, we'll get a better idea of their comprehension. I'm just going to share one example that I heard that was helpful once a family was explaining how their child kept breaking curfew over and over again and would get in trouble and kept breaking curfew. And it wasn't until finally this youth said, well, what does curfew mean? And their parents hadn't even considered that they didn't understand the word curfew. They just, the youth said, yeah, curfew's 9 o'clock. He knew to say curfew's 9 o'clock, but no one had checked to see if there was understanding of what curfew actually meant. So this might help if you're getting into a situation where they're saying the right answers. Just take that moment and check for further understanding. So we also want to think about how we talk about developmental skills. We have heard sometimes people say things like, so-and-so is high functioning or low functioning, or as an example here, John is socially 20, but cognitively 12. So we really don't want to assign ages to, race and abilities, and just know that people have varying challenges and they can change from time to time. And we would want to flip that and really talk about what their support needs are, rather than trying to assign an age number to it that really gives the wrong message. So you can see how these were reworded. John has lower support needs socially, but needs more support with daily tasks. Or Mary has relatively low support needs. So just a way to think about how you're talking about it. And with that in mind, just thinking about developmentally, perhaps one individual could be high in social skills and language skills. So, we would, maybe they're scoring here, but then, in other areas, executive functioning, motor skills, cognitive, kind of a range. It might be lower, it might be higher, and it might change over time as they are able to kind of identify their challenges and find ways to navigate life with them. And so we just want to think about always, even if you've met an individual before, always thinking of the spectrum of their support needs and how it changes over time, and how we really want to just think about each individual. Of course, we know not everyone with FASD is going to be the same and have the same needs. And so what is that individual's support needs? What does that look like for them specifically? And also, how has it changed over time? We also want to do, and just note that FASD is commonly underdiagnosed and misdiagnosed. And so there are a lot of overlapping characteristics that can occur. It's estimated that 94% has a co-occurring mental health disorder. And so this is just a few of those that we see that could be misdiagnosed if someone isn't asking about prenatal alcohol exposure or considering that that might be the cause of some of the challenges, or it could be co-occurring as well. Someone could have anxiety or depression or ADHD along with FASD. So we really want to look at the full picture of the individual. All right. So with that, I'm going to pause our PowerPoint. We are excited to have a video where a young adult with FASD shares a little bit about themselves and their own experience. But I'm just going to pause before we go into that video and unshare my screen because I wasn't able to see the chat during that time. So I'm going to pause for questions and uh, see if we have any questions that people would like to ask before we move on. You can put them in the chat or you can unmute. And Marissa, if you came in late as my co-presenter here, we can answer some of the questions before we move on to the video. And if you don't have any at this time, that's fine too. Okay. Well, I will get our video up here. It's a nice opportunity for us to bring in someone to share their own lived experience without having them have to put this into their schedule this morning, but be able to join us in this way. And so let me share. Here we go. Oh, actually, I'm gonna make sure I do it in a way that, there we go, that you can hear it. Okay. There we go. All right.
Coda, how does FASD kind of show up in your life?
Yo, I'm a mess, but it's okay. FASD is definitely, so when I was younger, I would say between the like really young, like 3 to maybe like even 15 or 16. I had a lot more behavioral issues than I did have like learning differences. So my behavioral issues were basically around the fact that I couldn't sit still, and like I had really bad anxiety as a kid, as a young kid, and through, I still do, but as a young kid, I didn't know how to deal with that anxiety. And like, so I would just like, it was either like I'd get it out by moving or I'd get it out by hitting things. And so it was like, there wasn't really a kind of an in between, and I would go, because I would hold it in and like and I really didn't recognize it was happening. I'm older and I kind of understand kind of like what I need to do when I feel like that. The biggest thing for me is really the learning differences in classrooms. And so like I have things like other things that I go through disability services for. So it's really been about like learning kind of what I need, and then also another struggle that I have is advocating for myself, particularly with people in power, like disability services or like with professors, because they scare me. That's basically what it comes down to. Like I just, so I don't really have a lot of the same stuff that I had as a kid, and it has honestly like changed over time. But it's different for everyone too.
Coda, what are some strategies that help you be successful or address some of the challenges that you brought up?
As a younger kid, it was really helpful for me to have not only a verbal kind of like warning or a verbal kind of reminder of like whether it was for behavior or for a schedule, but it was also really helpful for me to have a visual reminder of the schedule, whether that was like, I think as a kid, like having a weekly schedule with each day, like a thought for each day, so that I had like a visual representation, and then a auditory kind of thing, like whether it was like my mom being like, hey, like you have to go to soccer practice in 5 minutes, shut off your game and go, or like be like, hey, go look at your schedule to see, as I got older, it was like, go look at your schedule to see what you have coming up, and like that kind of thing. So, and then now that I'm in college, I still actually have forms of both of those things, but what I do is I have a visual calendar with that like will give me notifications on my computer and my phone and stuff. I have timers for literally everything, and like I'll do like 5-minute increments. And then the other thing that has been really helpful is working with like different support systems in college. So and I'm also now in my own apartment off campus. And so I also have like reminders on my calendar.
Yeah.
I also feel like there's just not a lot of information on older adults because it kind of just ends at 18. And so I don't know. think it's important.
All right. So I will see if anyone has any questions or comments from that video. Marissa has worked with CODA for over the years.
Yeah, so before I share my screen and we continue with the slides, I've worked with CODA since he was about 14 or 15. You know, along with the privilege to work with hundreds of youth within FASD over the last 17 or so years. And, you know, right off the bat, right, CODA's impressive. I mean, he's a good self-advocate. He appears to have good self-awareness. You know, he has low support needs when it comes to independent living skills and good social skills. He's hilarious in person. I mean, this is just a snippet. But I want to look at kind of what he presents versus kind of what are the challenges that I know that he has experienced. You know, so he labels his anxiety as the trigger for his emotional or for his behavior issues when he was growing up, which is really just like emotional dysregulation that he's experienced as a kid. You know, one thing I know about him is that really kind of helped launch him into success was a lot of early intervention services. He had really some sensory processing disorder issues, so lots of occupational therapy helped with that with him. You know, and he says, I know what I need to do when I feel like that. So, you know, we're looking at that as really good self-awareness. But I want to be mindful of a lot of times youth within FASD will say kind of what they know that we want to hear without necessarily kind of that processing and internal comprehension that Kendra mentioned. And so, you know, him saying, I know what I need to do in that situation is great. But, you know, one example, 2 summers ago, we were on a one-day canoe trip. And CODA had a really bad morning. Something happened, showed up, and was in a bad mood, just kind of disrespectful and rude to kind of the people that were helping us canoe, different things like that, just having a really tough time. You know, and a neurotypical youth probably would have been able to turn that around once they started talking with some of their friends that were showing up for canoe, or like an hour later when we stopped for lunch. What's different about FASD is he wasn't able to turn it around the entire duration of our day, right? So that's kind of, you know, that perseveration piece, which is you can't stop thinking about what happened, that a lot of the youth with an FASD experience. And so, you know, we had a really tough day, even at the end. But I will tell you, I think he texted me that evening and said, wow, I'm really sorry. Like, I could not pull it together. I was in a bad mood. I was being a SHIT. And, you know, so definitely the self-awareness is there, but it might be after the fact, right? Because of that impulsivity and that inability to be able to stop perseverating about something bad that happened. And, you know, he talks about important things too about that help him stay organized, related to kind of independent living, which is really helpful for him. And so I'm going to kind of launch into some of these other characteristics, and we can go back and talk about CODA as an example for some of these. He is an absolute delight. I wish you could see him live. Okay. My screen showing up okay? Characteristics of FASD here. Okay, so important to remember that it's a spectrum disorder. Every case is unique and not everyone with an FASD has the same characteristics, but there certainly are common characteristics that we've observed over the years and that we know are true. And it's also important to note that intelligence level is not necessarily a good indicator of whether someone has an FASD or not. So people with an FASD can have a very high IQ, but it doesn't mean they haven't been impacted in other ways from prenatal alcohol exposure, and it doesn't mean their executive function isn't really impacted there. So difficulty following directions and connecting steps. And so, how I kind of alleviate this is certainly just giving kind of 1 or 2 step directions at the time and checking for processing to make sure that everyone is understanding. Poor social skills and lack of boundaries. I mean, poor social skills are something that can be taught, right? So, if you look at a lot of the young adults that we work with at Proof Alliance, some of them have excellent social skills. That's something that can be taught. So the lack of boundaries, I think, is a little bit more important to talk about because that's an abstract thought or an abstract concept, right? These boundaries of what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And where I see this kind of show up is really them having a hard time distinguishing between like what's a good friend, what's a bad friend. Just because I talked to someone at the mall, does that mean we're dating now? Kind of these abstract things in life are pretty difficult for them to understand at some point. Slower information processing, we talked about that. So whenever I'm explaining something, I definitely will wait a beat, let them process, and then check for understanding again. And Kendra touched on confabulation. So yeah, confabulation is, a symptom of people with memory disorders, like brain injury or even Alzheimer's. And it's simply filling in the gaps for memory. But this has consequences, right? Like when you're young and you're a teen, your friends will think you're a liar. And so in our groups that we do at Proof, we talk about this as a symptom, confabulation. And so what can they do about it? So, one thing is being able to teach them some self-awareness about when it's happening, and then, or maybe going back and looking at that, and then giving them the skills to help fill in the blanks and really empower them to say, I don't remember, or something, some that they might say to friends is, oh, I have memory issues. Sometimes I forget things, something like that. Because we see confabulation quite a bit. In one of my groups, a young man, we were talking about what we did over the weekend. He said he rode a motorcycle to Chicago, which, I know him. He doesn't have a motorcycle. But, it's simply like, maybe he was thinking about that. Or maybe he watched a movie and someone rode a motorcycle to Chicago. I don't know. But either way, that was his check-in about what we did over the weekend. And I know that wasn't true. I didn't call him on it, but I did talk to him a little bit after and say, if you don't have what you did last weekend, it's okay to just say, I don't remember. And so giving them the skills to be able to notice when they're doing that and then give them some alternative things to do rather than just filling in the blanks. Regulating emotions, we're going to talk about that quite a bit. And then that under oversensitivity to sensory input, we know is pretty common. I think it gets better with age a lot of times. We see this in younger kids and school age kids a lot more than the young adults that I work with, but it's still there. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about what you can do to help with some of those things. And younger kids, they're this under an oversensitivity to sensory, can skyrocket to a behavioral issue at the point. It could be the tags on the shirt, it could be lights, it could be noises, different things like that. But how this is going to come out is going to come out possibly in some emotional dysregulation or behavior challenges. And so it's important to be proactive when it comes to kind of sensory things that are happening. All right, some other common characteristics. So this is specifically related to executive functioning. So memory and attention, we know is a big one. And so I think, doing everything that we can to help them with memory is really important. Impulse control is a biggie because we know that frontal lobe is impacted by prenatal alcohol exposure. And so, impulse control coupled with the need or the want and desire to have friends can be really set them up for a dangerous situation. Because I know a lot of the youth I work with, and this is kind of across the board with youth with disabilities, is it can be really isolating and they really want to make friends. And so, one of the now she's a young adult, but who I worked with, was on a school bus sitting on the back, I think on the way back from something, and they were in the back of the bus, and they dared her to jump out the back of the bus, a couple of people around her. And so, she's adventurous. It doesn't have impulse control. Also really wanted to impress those people on the bus so they would be friends with her. So what does she do? She jumps out the back of the bus while it's moving. Luckily, it was just like around the school or something, and it wasn't very far. But, it's that inability a lot of times to kind of stop, think, and act and think about the consequences for that. Abstract concepts, so related to time, the passage of time, how long things take. Money is an abstract concept that we see some challenges with a lot of times. And then kind of the social boundaries, relationships, different things like that. Those are really abstract. And so, in our groups, we spend a lot of time talking about relationships, friendships, different things like that, navigating some of those things that can be really hard to read, some societal norms that they might just not understand. So we can kind of help them understand some of that. Organizing stored information. So Kendra mentioned this. So they might learn something, and they're excited about it. They got the info, and the next day it's just not there. And so that can be frustrating. It can be embarrassing. And so, any kind of accommodations or help you can put in place to help them retrieve information is always really helpful. Problem solving can also be difficult. That requires, multiple steps, thinking about the future, different things like that. And generalizing concepts. So this is transferring knowledge from one situation to another situation. So they might be taught to cross the street, or if they're older, ride a bus to point A to point B. But that concept and that know-how of how to do something might not translate to a different bus route or a different street. And so it's important to check in with them and see what their understanding is. And then also looking for kind of teachable things that can transfer to different situations. Oop, that's not good. Lost my thing here. All right. Sorry about this. There we go. Okay. One here. All right. So looking through a different lens. So looking at things differently, a paradigm shift, remembering that FASD is a permanent organic brain injury. Just happens that it was acquired before birth. And so looking at some of these things, the first step is getting yourself in the right mindset. So you're doing that today. You're learning about FASD. And parents and professionals report a significant shift in their perceptions once they understand FASD. And the shift can be a feeling of, from frustration to really like acceptance. And so making sure we're meeting individuals where they are, and observing their behaviors, and looking at strengths. And so looking, instead of behaviors, looking at as symptoms of their brain injury, symptoms of FASD. Switching from won't, like they're being they are unwilling to do something, versus like maybe they can't do this. It's not necessarily that they're being oppositional. It might be for a variety of reasons why they're not doing what they might be asked. And so investigate, see what's happening. Refusing to sit still. This could be a sensory need. They could just be, need to move. They might have something going on related to that. Doesn't care, switching to doesn't understand. So I have learned these lessons the hard way many, many times through groups and different activities. And a lot of times, if I see youth just shutting down completely, like I'm explaining, hey, we're going to do this project, blah, 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 and I'm, talking too fast or not explaining things right, they might just like slouch back in their beanbag and close their eyes. Doesn't mean they don't care. Maybe they really want to do the activity, but I'm not doing my job explaining something correctly. And then again, this lying, looking at it more of a confabulation, and looking at it might not be intentional, and doesn't try to consider tired of failing. You know how exhausting school can be for youth with an FASD because, they're trying to learn this information in each class. And then in addition to the academic part, they're also trying to navigate these social relationships. And so it might just be too much. And so a lot of times we'll see school refusal or different things like that, because they're just not getting the support that they need in different situations. So they might end up giving up, essentially. So, all right, so thinking about some strategies. So what can we do? We know what these challenges are. We know what parts of the brain are impacted. And so what can we do as like social service providers or caregivers or whoever we might be? So it's important to create an environment that is sensory friendly, and by decreasing distractions. Um, and so, one of the things that you can do proactively is kind of scan the environment, make sure that there's not like wild sensory things happening, like buzzing fans and, noises and fans running and different things like that. Um, because all this proactive work of adapting the environment is essentially going to create a calmer environment altogether, and you're going to see less emotional dysregulation by doing this proactive work. So minimizing distractions. If you're sitting down, maybe doing like a one-on-one or something with a youth with an FASD or suspected FASD, make sure you're closing the door, you're minimizing distractions, turning the phone off, different things like that. And this create calm, but I would say model calm, making sure that I'm calm in a situation, that when they're escalating, I'm not escalating to the situation. I'm staying like even Steven, calm as can be. And then always having, a million fidgets, different things like that. Whether it's a one-on-one or a group or you're meeting with a family. I have a huge bucket of fidgets that I have for every group activity. For school age kids, what I used to do is have a table in the far side of the room that had a blanket on it. So if they were just completely overstimulated, they had somewhere to escape to where I could still see them and they were safe. And so, look at the environment in which you might be interacting with people with an FASD, and kind of make some changes to help support their success in those environments. Variety of different regulation tools. Most of you are probably familiar with some of these. They're similar to, if you're working with youth with autism or other neurodivergent populations. So noise canceling headphones, weighted blanket. There's a little mini one for school. Otherwise, weighted blankets have really been helpful for a lot of people with an FASD, kind of that heavy weight or even squeezing pressure, different things like that can help with regulation. Things that can help them move their bodies while seated. So the balls, the foot thing. And then animals can be incredibly calming. So one of the groups that we did that sunsetted about a year ago, it was called Baxter Circle of Support. So that was a support and skills group for teens and young adults, in which I brought my golden retriever, and he did that group for 8 years, until he retired, and now he's just laying around the house. But I check with who you're working with, obviously, because everyone's different, but I think animals can really help create a calm environment if that's a possibility. This little cozy cove, there's a million things that you can do to kind of create a little escape. That's also where you can provide supervision at the same time. And fidget spinners. Apparently those are old now. Like no one wants to play with the fidget spinners, but you get the gist of it with having different fidgets and stuff to move their hands and keep them busy. So adapting the environment, this could be at home or in different offices. So rules, so simple and visual. And so how I typically do this is if there are some rules, which I tend to use more positive language than negative. So instead of like, you know, no going into the clinic or no going into the office, I might just say, stay in the family support room, as a rule. But I will go through those rules every time, even if we've been at group 10,000 times. And I'll also explain them verbally and have them kind of up on like a whiteboard or something like that. So there's multiple ways to kind of revisit those and look at those. Using color coding can be helpful. Checklists, for sure. I think timers, we use timers quite a bit in group to help people kind of stay on track when they're talking. And then labels. So another abstract concept is like personal possessions. So labeling things, like if you're in a, say they might be in a group home environment, or there might be multiple kids even in the family. So labeling uh, whose item different things are, because a lot of times that concept can be abstract. And if something's just sitting on the table and it's shiny and cool looking, like an old fidget spinner or something, they might just pick it up and grab it and be like, oh, cool, I found this. Not knowing or not considering that this belongs to someone else. So labels can be helpful in being proactive and avoiding some situations that could potentially escalate. So like I said, timers, I've worked with families who have had timers in their bathrooms in the shower, just because of that abstract concept of the passage of time. So they had a kid who would just shower until the water turned cold, and then obviously no one else in the house could shower. And so, there's really simple ways to kind of help support some of these issues with executive functioning. And we use timers in group, like I mentioned, when we're doing our check-in, because a lot of times for individuals with the youth with an FASD, they might talk and talk and talk and tell a story, because they might not be able to pick up on social cues around them. Like people are looking away, someone pulls out their phone, they're distracted. But that might be kind of hard to pick up for youth with an FASD. And so just trying to do things that can be supportive to kind of help keep them on track. Visual stop signs, true story. I had to do this. So we do our youth group in one room, and then the caregivers go in another room. And I used to have like one of them would get up to use the restroom. And then I heard from the facilitator in the support group, like, you keep having the teens walking in our room. And I was in there, so in our family support room with the teens, so I wasn't aware of this. So like, duh, on my part, I just simply put a little stop sign like up on the whiteboard when we have group, and put, please do not enter caregiver group. And so some of the things you don't know you need until it happens. So labeling things, using visuals, checklists, those can all be really, really helpful. And I know for, young adults or adults maybe who live independently, they might have a visual on their door for when they leave their apartment, with a checklist. Do you have your phone? Do you have your keys? Do you have your wallet? Did you turn off lights? And lock the door. So a visual can be helpful even for adults with an FASD too, because as we know, some of these memory deficits are going to be there, but they might just have more interventions and more strategies to help them, but they're still going to be there in adulthood. Communication. So I already kind of went through this. So breaking things down step by step versus a long chain of directions. Instead of go upstairs, get your library book, put it in your backpack, get on your shoes, and grab your water bottle and meet me in the car. That's a lot. So, if you say that and then you see them and they're stuck at step one, or you might see, some behavior escalation. It could just be because they're overwhelmed and you asked way too much for them in that one task. And demonstrating the instructions multiple times. So, verbally, using visuals. And I really like actually like kind of modeling how to do things a lot of times, or even using role play, different things like that. Allowing extra time for processing. And this is important. And I think, as people, like, we have kind of the norms of, like, when you ask someone something, like, when you talk after that. Um, and so just notice that when you're doing that, when you're asking someone something before you start talking again. Um, and add a little time for that, for processing. Oh, and then I already had mentioned this too. So focusing on what should be done versus what should not be done. Um, and then giving alternatives, I think especially for younger children. And I think, parents know this, it's like, do you want to wear the blue shirt or the red shirt, when maybe you knew they wanted to wear a cape or something, so giving alternatives, and then using role playing as much as possible. And I really like to do, using different scenarios and having the group, or if they're, or you could have an individual work through some things together. And so scenarios that come up in some of our groups would be, boundaries, dating, different things like that. And so I might even, like, put in a, like a basket, like a different scenario, and then they would read it. And it's like, someone texts you this, can you send me a picture of yourself, whatever. And so we'll talk about whatever that scenario is, and then what would be an appropriate response, and then they can kind of come up with that together. um, and hopefully it'll stick a little bit when we talk about scenarios and role playing and different things like that. Just a little bit more hands-on than just describing something. Additional communication strategies to help lead for success. So think literal interpretation, because a lot of times people with an FASD can be pretty concrete thinkers. And so, if you're explaining, dad's tied up at work right now, so we're not going to have dinner till 7. So think literally, like, what might be going through someone's head, like they're envisioning their dad tied up on his office chair, and it can be confusing. So, you know, not saying that people with an FASD don't understand jokes. I know some great joke tellers and can be funny, but it's a spectrum. And so not everyone might understand. And so getting to know that individual, and knowing what your communication strategy should be with them and what should be avoided, is always really helpful. Being consistent with terms used, this is really important. And so even, so say there's a team of people supporting someone with an FASD, making sure everyone is using the same terms, like whether it's, like employment support or job support or coaching or something like that. Think about, like, those are all kind of different terms. You might know what you're talking about, but if you keep switching up the terms, it might be kind of hard to understand. And continuously checking for understanding. And that doesn't mean, asking them, do they understand? It means asking them, can you describe what I just explained to you? Or can you show me, how you would do this? Um, because if you ask them, do you understand? Well, obviously they're going to say, yeah, I understand. Um, and so, demonstrating those directions, and then also helping interpret other people's social cues or behaviors. This can be really important, I think, depending on the age that you're working with. A lot of times my youth, some might come in and someone might say something to them, kind of snarky, or they might just ignore them because they're checking their phone or something. And then, the other youth might think they're mad at them, or they might come to me and be like, did I do something wrong? It seems like they're mad at me. And so helping them understand, like, oh, well, I think they were just distracted, or, they were responding to a text. They didn't see you. So helping them understand, and interpret some of the social, kind of the social things can be really helpful with them. Um, so I think that is important. Making abstract concepts concrete. So these are kind of the biggies when it comes to these abstract concepts that we're seeing challenges. So time, so the passage of time, but also, understand or being able to, this is so the kind of like a, not even a fun fact. I don't even know what it is. But so I was doing something once in one of our groups with our teens and young adults. And I showed like a regular clock versus, the digital. Um, and like half of them were like, I don't know how to read one of those clocks. And they're like, me too. Um, and so, checking in with some things related to time is always really important. Also, I think the value of introducing people with an FASD to others that have FASD. A lot of the youth that come to our programming have never even met someone that had the same diagnosis. And so it can be really reassuring, because a lot of times anywhere they go, they might feel like they don't necessarily fit in, or they might feel excluded. And so I just think it's important for them to experience being in a place where people get it. Um, Money. And so, when we're doing any kind of budgeting or talking about money, I typically bring in physical, like replica money that I bought online when we're talking about budgeting. So we might do something where we are looking for an apartment online together, and then we're doing an exercise about how would we pay for rent? Like, what do you need for things like that? And I like to use kind of real hands-on money for that to kind of get the concept of it. And we already talked about this, ownership. So using labels and visual boundaries to demonstrate ownership. And generalizing concepts. So this is that thing that we talked about of taking knowledge that you've gained to apply to one situation and then applying it to another situation. And so, for children, making sure you're teaching them in a variety of different settings, where they might have to do some different things like this. And I already talked about a little bit with generalizing concepts related to terminology and different things like that. All right. So this is kind of related to therapy. I'm not sure if you're making referrals for a therapist or different things like that, but um, making sure that that's consistent and it's routine, that's always really helpful. I think schedules and predictability can kind of create a sense of calm, which can be really helpful. Um, and also using scenarios to plan for change, because, even if you have a schedule, um, things happen in life. And so proactively talking about, in the right situation, when things don't go out as planned, like what is our response? Like, what are some positive things that we can do and how we react to situations when they change? And so using scenarios and role playing for different things like that to help build skills can be really important. Setting up device reminders. So, if I meet with someone and I say, we're going to meet again in 2 weeks, I have them pull out their phone, we put it on there, we make a reminder. And so that I know that it's there and they have that information. And in addition to that, I would probably reach out to someone, the day before or morning of, just reminding that we have an appointment together. Providing one-on-one. So I think this is really important because a lot of times, like Kendra mentioned, people with an FASD have co-occurring anxiety. And I see probably like anxiety as one of the biggest things that the youth that I work with talk about. And so going to new situations or coming to a group, a lot of times I'll do a one-on-one meeting first to kind of ease into a situation that is going to alleviate some of the anxiety. Using physical objects to address abstract concepts. So this is like using a talking stick or a ball or something like that. When you're trying to navigate like whose turn it is to talk or different things like that. So physical objects, visuals, those can always be really helpful. Avoid a zero tolerance policy. So this is hard in a lot of different situations. But what we do know is that young people with an FASD oftentimes are kicked out of summer camps or kicked out of even preschool. And that is because the people around them don't understand their disability. And so in all of the years I have been at Proof Alliance, in the hundreds of youth that we've worked with, I have only asked one person to not come to group activities. And I would continue to provide individual support. And that was due to some sexually inappropriate behavior, which we know can also be common, right? Because boundaries, abstract, coupled with impulsivity, sometimes you'll see some sexually inappropriate behavior. And so we often do referrals for places that can help specialize in that. So it is important to have a zero tolerance policy as much as possible, just knowing the history of a lot of the young people with an FASD. And, like anything, using a person-centered approach, getting to know them. What are their strengths? Where are their challenges? Where do they feel like they need support? So always really important too. All right, supporting emotional dysregulation. Step one, don't lose your cool yourself. So it can be, we know that people with an FASD can be easily overwhelmed, stressed, and things can escalate fairly quickly. And so getting to know them and being able to recognize when they might be ramping up. So watching for that increased movement or fidgeting, or they might start talking louder. And so being able to recognize that. And validating what you're seeing. So I can see you look stressed, or it looks like you may need my help with this, or something like that. And then when possible, finding somewhere quiet to remove them from the situation. So whether it's like if you're in a group setting or somewhere, going out into the hallway, not by themselves, but with an adult. Finding somewhere with lower sensory input, and then using what's called kind of low and slow language. So monotone, my voice isn't getting higher. My voice is staying really calm. I can see that you're looking stressed right now. Would you like to leave and go sit out here and we can talk? And then not repeating their name over and over again, because like, Coda, 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 I need you to calm down. Coda, I mean, that can also be really triggering. So avoiding that. Making sure that you're on their level, so you're sitting down or you're stooping down with them, so it doesn't appear that that there's a kind of this authority thing happening. In addition to using calm and kind of that low and slow language, using open body language, so just having your arms relaxed and open on your lap. And then unless they have requested, like maybe like a tight squeeze or something that might help with sensory, a lot of the youth, what they'll tell me is, don't tell me to calm down and don't touch me. And so big things like that, because touching can be triggering in different situations depending on their history. And when situations are really escalating, I try not to sit like face to face, looking right at someone. So I might sit just next to them and then kind of calmly talk with them. And I think it's important too, staying with them. So a lot of people with an FASD might have a history of foster care or different things in adoption, and they may have some reactive attachment disorders. And so by throwing them out somewhere in the hallway by themselves or in a room by themselves is going to create a feeling of rejection and not support. And so making sure you have someone that can stay with them, like, I'm here for you. I'm not going to leave. Let's just sit here until we can kind of calm down a little bit. Staying in the present is really important, rather than saying, like, if you don't calm down right now, we're not going to have pizza next week. And then, I'm going to probably text your mom on Monday, and all these things. So just focus on staying in the present, calming down right in that moment. And then distraction works, and so they might something bad might have happened, or someone might have said something to them. And so they're escalating. And so they're really perseverating on kind of what just happened. And so instead using distraction, like, did you know some cats are actually allergic to people? Let's Google it. So using distraction to kind of switch the way that their brain is working right at that moment to focus on something else. Again, therapy is hit or miss. Everyone's an individual, so it's important to find out what's going to work for them. But typically, kind of therapies that rely on a lot of kind of self-awareness and insight-based could be challenging. And then also kind of just the talk therapy. I mean, Kendra did the example of Giddy Bergen and whatever the names were, that story. And so can you imagine that in a therapy setting? The therapist is talking about what's going to work, and they might just tune that out, or they might only process half of what's being said. And so trying different therapies for different people is absolutely important, and making sure it's a strength-based approach. Hands-on, so art therapy, animal-assisted therapies like equine therapy. We have so many youth over the years that have done great with equine therapy. And then making sure incorporating cultural traditions and rituals can be beneficial as well. And then using positive focus system when it comes to progress and success there. All right, so I kind of touched on this a little bit. So assumptions about how people should act in the world, in life. So, just generally as society, we have assumptions that when you say something, people understand it. And, we assume that people will tell the truth when they're asked something, rather than maybe fill in the blanks because of a memory issue. And another assumption is that a person will make informed choices if they commit a crime or do something like that. That's our assumption, when maybe there could be a variety of reasons, and young people with an FASD are often the scapegoat because they're trying to kind of impress or build friendships. And then also with impulsivity, they might be the one to kind of go for it and get into trouble. And we assume everyone understands consequences. So, if you do this, then here's what the consequence is going to be, as well as learning from previous consequences. So, they might get a consequence, but they might do the same thing again. And so we need to provide support in making sure that they're understanding what is happening, making sure consequences are immediate and real versus like far out in the future, you're going to lose your phone for 6 months. I mean, that consequences need to be immediate for them to really be impactful. We assume people are in control of their behavior just as a society. When we know that someone with organic brain injury might not be in control of their behavior at the moment. It's really hard when things start to escalate to kind of pull in that part of our brain that's going to help us calm down. They're not processing. They're using kind of that, back part of the brain in those really intense moments. And we assume that people should be independent, and that parents at one point should kind of step back and let their person leave the nest and live independently. When we know that people with an FASD needs support, and supported independence is what might be most appropriate for them. Not everyone, it's a spectrum, but we look at parents of people with an FASD, and people that don't understand the disorder might say they're helicopter parents. They're too overprotective. Why won't they let them go to the mall by themselves to meet friends? When really it's a safety issue, it's a supervision issue. They may need that support. And so before we cast judgment about how someone is parenting someone with an FASD, we need to understand that we don't know what type of support that and supervision that individual might need. All right. So this is kind of cool. So we asked a bunch of caregivers to submit words to create a word cloud and look at all the different strengths that their loved one with an FASD has. And so I really like looking at all of these, and you can see the big ones that came up a lot. Resilient, definitely. In one group, all I do is talk about resiliency and what that means. You know, they experience a lot of adversity in a lot of different areas of their life. And it's pretty incredible. You know, you heard from Coda for a couple minutes, but a lot of the young people that we support are incredibly gifted and amazing. Creative, so arts and hands-on and determined, funny, good with animals, good with young children. So a lot of great strengths. It's important to consider the strengths when we're talking a lot today about kind of what the challenges are of FASD. And FASD informed approach. So what you're doing now is you're learning kind of what is the best approach when supporting someone with prenatal alcohol exposure, you know, whether it's suspected or confirmed FASD, because we know there's limited diagnostic capacity in the state to get a diagnosis, to get an assessment. And so all of our programming is open to people with an FASD or suspected, because we know a lot of times you might not have that confirmed maternal alcohol exposure if they're coming from foster care, if they're internationally adopted or different things like that. So I just wanted to throw that in there with FASD and suspected FASD. So having awareness, so recognizing capabilities, challenges, shifting the expectations from that won't to can't in providing support, and taking a holistic approach. So consider how those social determinants of health that Kendra mentioned are coming into play, related to the person's well-being and need for support. And person-centered accommodations, you know, recognizing everyone's uniqueness, everyone's unique area where they may need support and help. And, you know, and using a strength-based approach, because this population encounters a lot of challenges in their lives. And so helping them identify their own strengths and abilities is also really important. Safety and relationship-based. I think this is really important. You know, I think working with youth and caregivers, step one is establishing a relationship, getting to know them. And then based on that, kind of customizing the support that you're providing, and the environment. And so we all play a role in preventing FASD and then supporting those that are impacted. And it's really exciting that you all are here today, and now you are working your way and you're FASD informed. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and then we can see if there's questions and discussion, and then we can share a little bit more about what we can provide at Proof Alliance. All right. Kendra is there. So not sure if there's any questions in the chat. I don't see any. If not, we can, we'll pause here for a minute, not a minute, a second or two. And if not, we can talk about some, oh, here's a question. Okay, how is FASD diagnosed and by whom? Okay, and can someone be diagnosed in retrospect as an adult? I think either one of us could answer this, but why don't you want to talk a little bit, Kendra?
Sure. Yeah. So there are clinics that do FASD diagnosis at this time. a primary care provider would make a referral to an FASD diagnostic clinic. They're embedded in a lot of practices throughout the state of Minnesota. Eventually, we would like it to be much more accessible, but for now, we have our own diagnostic clinic at Proof Alliance, and then there are others around the Twin Cities metro area and the state. You can find a clinic near you on our website if you just go to proofalliance.org and look under diagnosis. But what happens is there's both a physical portion of the FASD assessment and then a neuropsych testing portion. So the physical part will look for growth deficiencies, facial features. Like I said, many don't have them, but they may be present, and do a medical assessment. And so that is done by a medical provider, nurse practitioner, a physician, etc. And then the neuropsych testing will be the portion that looks for cognitive impairments, and that usually takes a few hours. And then really the diagnosis is made by putting the puzzle pieces together. So they look at growth deficiencies or growth impairments, height, weight, head circumference. They look at facial features, they look at neuropsych testing, and they look at confirmed prenatal alcohol exposure. Put all of those puzzle pieces together, and then if there is a diagnosis that's made, they can make that diagnosis along with referrals and recommendations. So many clinics, including ours, has a feedback session, so you're not just handed the diagnosis, but you have a chance to meet and talk through what this means for you and really break it down. So kind of where do you go with this next? And yes, there are less places that do diagnosis as an adult, but there are a few clinics that do diagnosis for over 18. So again, I would go to, and I can drop the link in, but proofalliance.org is our main website. Right at the top, you'll see a tab for diagnosis, and that can answer other questions as far as what to bring, where to find a clinic, etc. So yeah, that's a little bit about diagnosis.
Looks like there's another question in there. At the beginning, you spoke a lot about what we don't know correlates with FASD, but do you know anything for sure that correlates with prenatal alcohol consumption and a diagnosis? I wonder if you could clarify a little bit. Are you talking about correlation related to like executive functioning, areas of the brain we know are impacted by through research?
Yeah,
take a stab at that.
Madeline, if you're able to just maybe say a little bit more about what you're looking for.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it was difficult to word.
Sure.
I'm just curious about we spoke about what type of alcohol, we don't know if that can cause or not fetal alcohol, and the amount of consumption, we don't know, but is there anything that we do know, like time of pregnancy that alcohol is consumed that may cause FASD, or, is there anything that we do know correlates with between the two?
Sure. Okay. So we do know that alcohol exposure during pregnancy is what is needed for an FASD to happen. But the reason it's a spectrum is it can look differently. So it doesn't matter what you drink, any alcohol, but if it's happening in the beginning of pregnancy, it will be impacting different parts of the brain that are forming versus at the end. And then also the amount, so the degree of the impact. If it's binge drinking, that is more profound impact versus not binge drinking. So we do know we can draw a line from alcohol exposure to FASD, but what that looks like in the individual will vary depending on how much and when and all of those different factors, diet, age of the person that's pregnant, the resiliency of the fetus. So kind of those are along the line that change how FASD shows up. Does that help?
Sure. Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the most important thing is just, the brain is developing that entire pregnancy. And so could be impacted at any time.
Mm-hmm. Great. I see another one about diagnosis and asking if the child is adopted and prenatal alcohol exposure is suspected but not known for sure, can they be diagnosed? So there are different ways that we are able to get information about confirmed prenatal alcohol exposure. And I've heard at our clinic that our clinic manager should be a private detective with how well they are able to sometimes find birth records and reports that adoptive parents didn't even know existed. And so there are ways sometimes to get that information. And we try many different ways to find it on any kind of records. There are also sometimes ways that we're able to connect, if there was a record of a DUI during pregnancy, there was alcohol use during pregnancy, it can show up different ways. There are also firsthand accounts or a verified person that witnessed the alcohol exposure can be concluded. There's ways that the clinic will go about it so that it's not just anyone making I heard so and so, or I think they really have to be careful and make sure that it is information that we can rely on. So all in all, just because you don't have confirmed alcohol exposure right now, there may be ways that the clinic can get to that information, and I would pursue an assessment to get started on that path.
One other question on here too, Kendra. How do FASD symptoms differ from symptoms of other drug use before birth? Which we kind of get that question quite a bit. I don't know if you have a response to that.
Yeah, I would say the quick takeaway is you may have heard of neonatal abstinence syndrome. And so some of the other substances that happen that there's prenatal exposure to, there may be a period of withdrawal that they are going through because of some of those other substances. However, long-term impact, alcohol has the most profound impact on long-term, cognitive impairment. So sometimes if a child goes through withdrawal, a baby does right after birth, later on they're able to catch up with peers cognitively versus if there was alcohol exposure, it is impactful lifelong. And so we do have, you'll see maybe some other things that come up. People want to compare it to autism spectrum. And so there are some really nice fact sheets on our website that do some comparisons with other substances like neonatal abstinence syndrome or other disabilities. So there could be some nice fact sheets for yourself or for others to share with others. They're free to share, download, help yourself too. So
great. Looks like hi, Linda Lee.
Hi.
Question. You have your hand up.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. No, I just wanted to thank you so much for coming. I'm a parent, and I think our children, or even when they grow up, are over-interpreted as being self-caring and self-safety competent because they're highly verbal and they talk. And people might over-interpret that as full competence. And then we as parents and teachers and therapists have to teach and reteach and reteach. And when you said every single time, that really reminded me that it's every single time and you can't get impatient about it. The other thing I wanted to thank you for is that, and I don't know if people have noticed this, but early on when my son was a 12-pound, 12-month-old failure to thrive infant, who's now a 37-year-old adult with a full-time job, I used to use words like poison, toxin, teratogen, prenatal insult. I thought I was getting to be so smart. And you and CODA are using words like learning differences and not brain damage. And I think when kids in their adoptive or foster homes hear, I have brain damage or I'm damaged, we really want to change the language. So with that, I mean, I'll stop, but I think I'm very, very grateful to you all. Oh, and I was going to say one other thing. People asked about other drugs. Alcohol is everywhere and it's affordable, and people who use other drugs often also have alcohol in their use pattern if they cannot get out of the house or they don't have money for the other drug. So we all need to be so broad in our thinking and just keep our minds really open. So thanks
Oh,
so
thank
much.
you, Linda. Appreciate your input there. Great. Right, I do not see any more questions. Do we want to quick go through our resources or talk about that?
Yeah, we
Okay.
can. Yeah.
Sure. Oh, not what I meant. Should have had you do it. Okay, here we go. All right, so we do a variety of different things at Proof Alliance. We've been around since 1998. The majority of our funding is from the Minnesota Department of Health, as well as foundation grants. And so we have a bunch of different kind of areas of our work. We do our public awareness and prevention, which those are when you see our billboards or we're at baby expos, and we're really out educating people about kind of the dangers of drinking alcohol during pregnancy. And then we community grants and partners. So we reinfuse into the community from our Minnesota Department of Health funding probably around $1 million, I would have to guess, this upcoming year. We'd have to ask Kendra. But those are the purpose of doing the community grants is because we know we can't do it all out there educating. And what we really want to do is build capacity among community partners so that they can be champions and they can be FASD informed within their organizations to kind of change system-wide practice. Family engagement and support, that's my area. We provide caregiver support groups. We do a family retreat. We have ongoing youth activities, which include support and skills group, leadership opportunities, team building, and social connection opportunities. So just kind of some fun events as well. We, as Kendra mentioned, we have a diagnostic clinic and screening. In addition to that, we facilitate the Minnesota Diagnostic Consortium. And so that's pulling together all the other diagnostic clinics periodically to talk about challenges, barriers, wait lists. I think our Kendra probably knows more, but I think our wait list is about 9 months. I know U of M is longer than that. So we know that we really need to do something to address diagnostic capacity in the state, and we're working towards that. Youth and young adult program, I talked about that. I have some youth that have been coming for over 10 years to our programming, slowly trying to shoo them from into some other programming more for transition age, but they really have connected and gelled, and they're also very welcoming to any new youth that attend any programming as well. So please reach out to me if you have referrals or if you want to learn more about our programming. Our public policy work, every year we set a public policy legislative agenda. What we do to gather that input is we often do a survey of our FASD community, talk about barriers and challenges, and then from there identify systemic changes that we can do to improve. Last year, we had a prevention-related focus, seeking funding to partner with women's treatment centers that are providing long-term recovery and providing grants to them. And then we also have done some mandated training for foster care. We've done a lot over the years, which that can also be viewed on our website under our public policy section. Stay tuned for FAC Advocacy Day this year at the Capitol. It's going to be in March. And then you'll probably see our legislative agenda come forward really soon. Professional education, that's training. That's what we are doing today. We provide training all over the state and go to a bunch of different conferences every year. So feel free to browse our website. There's a lot of resources on there. You can also reach out to us, and we're happy to follow up with you. Great. So with with that, I think that brings us to
I'm
the
going to.
close, unless Kendra, you want to weigh
Yeah.
in a little bit.
Well, I just put a link to evaluation in the chat. So it's just like 3 questions. Just lets us know if you want to take that. Any thoughts on the training? But we are, Marissa and I were sharing some links in our website, different places there. So hopefully you find those helpful, but we are always a resource if things come up outside of this training as well. So after you think about things and you come back and have a question, you can always reach out to our office. If you email info@proofalliance.org, we get it to the right person. So we get your question answered or connect you to what you're looking for. And Marissa put her email address there as well. So, we have space if there are questions that still didn't get answered, or any reflections on how this will come into your own practices. If you have a question as you're trying to think about these strategies and how to implement them, we're happy to take any more questions or thoughts that people would like to share. Oh, newsletter too. Yes, we also have a newsletter. So you can sign up for that on our website, and that will keep you updated as far as all the social events, support groups, happenings that we have throughout the year, online training opportunities. And Marissa, you
I do have
something you
one
wanna
thing
say.
to share. So
Yeah.
on September 9th, this Saturday, it's International FASD Awareness Day. And we have a really fun event in St. Paul coming up, and I'll just share that here. It's on our website. 1 second here. It's called Pins for Proof. We're going to be partnering with the Nook, which has the best burgers. Pins for Proof. So if you go to our website, you go to the events calendar on 9/9, we're going to be coming together as a community to celebrate FASD Awareness Day with complimentary bowling, sponsored by the Nook, and then food and bev available for purchase. So go to our website and join us.
So with that, any other last thoughts? Otherwise,
You get 10 minutes back.
Yeah, I don't see
your
any
day.
others coming in. So thank you all. Hopefully this is helpful as you go into your days today and can use some of this information. So thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. Bye-bye.